iCreate is under new management. So the company has had an interesting last few months with reports of the stock being suspended. So trading would have halted earlier this year. And so its former CEO, also Tyrone Wilson, had stepped down. So there's a lot of questions surrounding the company at this time. So joining me to discuss how the company plans to turn things around, we have Group Chief Executive Officer at iCreate, Arlene Martin, joining us tonight.
Good
Welcome,
evening,
Arlene.
Jermaine. Thank you. And good evening to all your listeners and viewers, especially those I understand interested in iCreate and particularly any of them who are investors. A very good evening to everyone.
Great. Thank you for joining us. So the first thing that we want to do is to really establish maybe how the last few months have been for iCreate. So there would have
Mhm.
been questions, well, naturally surrounding once Tyrone would have stepped down. So what is your role and focus for the company right now? Well,
Okay.
or just give us like a recap of the last few months as well.
Sure. So I think the recap, and most people would want to begin with the resignation of Tyrone Wilson. And at that point, I was appointed as the interim CEO. He resigned at the time from his position as president and CEO, as well as director of the board. So I would have stepped in as interim CEO, and we had appointed as interim chairman Mr. Ivan Carter. Ivan Carter had served as the chair of the audit committee previously, so had been there before as a director. I had been serving as chairman of the board and so stepped into the capacity as interim CEO while Ivan Kato would have been chair. And in that time, and I noticed that there was a comment there or a question in terms of even bringing things up to date with the JSE. So you mentioned that there was a suspension in trading in shares, and that also took place within days of the resignation. And that would have been, the notice would have said that was because of the delay. And I would say significant delay in the publishing of the audited financial statements for 2022. We did meet that deadline that was set once we had agreed with the JSE on that final extension to September 30, and those statements were submitted on September 29. So we were able to do that. We also were required to appoint, as required by the GSE for companies listed on the junior market, mentor. And this is a board mentor as required, as I mentioned, under the rules for junior market companies. So we would have, and this would have been late September into early October, appointed a mentor to the board, Mr. Kalanda Hutchinson. So with meeting those requirements, we would have had the resumption of the trading in shares. So that has been happening now since early October. Very good. And now we're really focused on growing the company, stabilizing things. And, we can talk more about that. I know you probably have some specific questions in terms of how we plan to do it. So I'll await your questions, Jermaine.
Okay. So what the next question that I'll ask you really is the mandate or focus of the company the same under your leadership?
So, what I would say is that there are a couple of things that we have to look at now, and I note that question, and I'll address it very shortly. Is there is stability and there is growth, and stability and growth based on things that have been happening when you have new leadership and just settling everyone into place, but stability in terms of the operations, corporate governance, and a number of things like that. And then focused on growth, not only because of the opportunities that are out there in all of the segments, but also the potential that's in the company. The focus on growth and stability also come from the recent acquisitions. So in January 2022, we would have closed the acquisition of GetPaid Group Limited that does SMS communication as well as e-commerce. And we would have announced in 2022 the acquisition of visualvibe.com, which is a digital out-of-home advertising company that closed fully earlier this year, end of May 2023. So you'd have seen that we started reporting and including as a group the financials for Visual Vibe beginning in, and we also synchronized that we had the Q2 results. That was the period ending June 23 published. You would have seen 1 month reflected for Visual Vibe then, and then in our Q3, you would have seen that Visual Vibe was fully represented. So I do want to respond to this question that you have here. Can you please, in the simplest way, explain what iCreate is and what is the core business? iCreate began as a training institute with a focus on impacting the creative and digital economies. and its training programs focus on those areas that for creative talent, videography, photography, digital marketing, the things around that sector. And it really is about equipping individuals for participating in those economies and growing those economies. But also, it's about how companies can tap into that so that they can actually take advantage of these things and grow. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, what would have happened is, or in the middle of the pandemic, with the measures that were put in place, we stopped doing all in-person classes, and all the classes were in person. So we shifted from simply a business growth strategy to a corporate growth strategy to emerge from COVID, and that's what took us into acquisitions. So that was primarily a mergers and acquisition strategy that we have. And having executed, and I just mentioned the acquisition of two companies, iCreate Limited is now a group of companies rather than simply or just solely the institute that's focused on training. So now in that group, and you would see in the annual report that was also published recently, that you have in that group now the three companies, iCreate Institute, or iCreate Limited, which has the Training Institute, as well as the creative agency, Vertical Creative, operating there. Then you have GetPaid, and as I mentioned, GetPaid is digital communication. So when you think about, and we just had some weather that would probably have required emergency communication, SMS is a part of that SMS communication, which is very reliable. So if you think about really needing to get communications out, if internet is down or people don't have data, then we can certainly still reach you via SMS. So that's one of the things that GetPaid does. However, our core area is e-commerce, and that's how it serves the digital economy, is that it enables companies to trade by setting up your website and different things, a range of e-commerce services from consulting to training to actually doing the sites. However, importantly, because one of the challenges that we have in the Caribbean, in particular in Jamaica, because you do have some territories in the Caribbean that are allowed to use some payment platforms. But when you're doing e-commerce in Jamaica, you tend to have some limitations on payment platforms. With GetPaid, they offer payment solutions so you can actually transact and collect money without hassle consistently with GetPaid. And then I think most people would be familiar with Visual Vibe. You see the digital boards across Kingston as well as across the island. We're in 5 parishes, so digital out of home advertising. So that's the essence now of what the group is. And our mandate right now, Jermaine, and for everyone, is the that kind of consolidation of how it is that we now get the synergies for greater efficiencies, continue to deliver value to our clients, and in so doing, deliver value to our shareholders. So it's synergy for operational efficiency, synergy for our clients as well, and then looking at how it is that we grow the company in so doing while still impacting the creative and digital economies.
Okay, so in short, what you're saying is that the path that you'd have started down when Tyrone was CEO, you're still down that path, and that is still the mandate that you're holding as a company?
Yes, so I would say that's still the mandate that we're holding in terms of the gaining the synergies. So we've closed the acquisitions, we're building those companies, we're growing those companies, and we're refocusing and putting attention back to the institute. I mentioned that we would have discontinued just for a period post COVID some of the programs that we had before. We're getting increased demand for these, so we're looking at next year and the coming year. So it really is just a couple months away, the reintroduction of these creative courses that people would have liked to benefit from. And what we're looking at as well is the expansion of courses. So when you think about the creative economies and digital, it's not simply graphic design, videography. There's so much more. So we have programs for the Digital Marketing Institute. We're looking at user experience, things like that, user interface design. So it is what we'll be doing with the institute as well is reintroducing programs that we had before, but also enhancing so that we're giving more to people so that our creative economies will grow because we are equipping, upskilling, introducing, just educating people for these fields where that it will allow just the sectors that exist in Jamaica to grow, but where we can even create new sectors for a stronger, more robust creative economy from right here in Jamaica. So that's our focus, even as we identify new programs and new partners to deliver under the Institute.
Okay. So Tyrone would have tendered his resignation a few months ago. Is there, or what is the working relationship between iCreate and Tyrone currently, if at
So,
all?
if at all, yes, there is a relationship. Don't worry. If you think about it in terms of just handing over a baton in a relay, you do have to hand over to someone. Sometimes it's not simply, just cheerleading from the side. You rely on that person for support. As you can imagine, when you look at the composition now, I was not in the operations of the company. And so when you look at the leadership team that you have in place now, I mentioned our chair, myself and the group CFO, the deeper understanding that we have to gain for the company, getting up to speed on things, that knowledge has to come from us, and it comes from us from that close relationship that we still have in terms of that transition. So the transition from it's kind of like orientation and onboarding, handing over, that still is required. And we've been able to do quite a bit of that so that what would not have happened is, just a big disruption in the operations. So because of the intensity that's now required in terms of the stability and moving forward, it would have been harder if you had just a total break or total separation without relying. So by having that kind of connection and that handover, it really has helped in the pace with which during these 3 months we've been able to accomplish some of the things that we have managed to accomplish. Because I did mention the completion of the audit, lifting of the suspension, and since then as well, in addition to the 2022 audited statements, we've issued the quarterly financial statements unaudited for both Q2 as well as Q3. So we've been able to go at pace because there aren't significant knowledge gaps or things like that.
Okay. So earlier this year, we had gotten news that Tyrone and Ideas Execution founder Kevin Frith were having some challenges in the
I'm not
acquisition
going
of
to comment
Ideas.
on that one. We're not at a place to get into detail on that one, Jermaine.
Can you say anything at all about it?
Not saying anything at all about that one. Focused on the growth of the company. And one of the things that you would have recognized, and I can say this to the listeners, is so this is my first interview actually, since we have a lot of work to do to grow the company, and this is about delivering value to our shareholders. This is about a focus again on our clients, and our shareholders, our clients, our team require our attention, and we have been very focused on working rather than just commenting and giving feedback on things. So I just want to comment on that to say the focus has been on doing the work. We'll begin to speak more now that we've gotten through some of the things, because we do need to communicate with persons for them to know and understand what's happening with the company. However, our focus really is on where the company is right now, where it is that we're going, and how it is that we're getting there.
Okay. So you mentioned the acquisition of Visual Vibes. Has that process been completed?
So we've had control, operational control of Visual Vibe since I would say June 1, because that transaction closed in terms of the handover May 31, 2023. And so we have had that. As I mentioned, you would have seen the June results in our Q2, the period ending June 30, or the quarter ending June 30. You would have seen that we reported for the first month. You would have had information on that in the annual report, and then certainly for the quarter that ended September 30, you would see the integration of Visual Vibe. So we have already started that integration, and fully operational with Visual Vibe. And as mentioned, it really is about leveraging all the synergies operationally, but also for added value to our clients. Because when you think about a typical client, you can see how it is that across the three companies, we can serve them to add value as they build, as they deliver their products, and as they deliver their services.
Okay. So in terms of, so one of the things that we heard last year was, so for example, there were talks of a rights issue, and that rights issue was meant to, for example, help with the financing for the acquisition of Visual Vibes. So one, what's the status of said rights issue? Because I believe we heard that VM was going to be, I think, somehow related in terms of that transaction. So what's the status of that one? And two, how were you able to finance the Visual Vibe acquisition, and is that process completed?
Okay, so yes, there was supposed to be a rights issue, and that process ended. So we didn't actually fully execute on that. And so what we've had to do is to do private financing for the acquisition process. So that's the route that we have been taken. It is private financing, so we won't get into that kind of detail. However, that's what we're able to do to raise capital for closing the acquisition.
So when
And
you say
what I would
private,
say is that for the start of next year in our first quarter, you'll probably hear more about additional financing that we're going to be doing for further expansion of the company in terms of raising private equity. Private equity. I think you're going to be asking me that, Jermaine.
well, so what I wanted to ask you was, so you mentioned there's private financing used to close Visual Vibe. Can you say the type of financing, even if you can't get into the details? Was it a loan? Was it like what type of financing was it?
So what I'll say now is private equity, and as I mentioned before, it is so we have to look at where we are in terms of the stages with things. It is private, so had it been an APO with a GMMB, nice and public, I would have shared all of that information. However, what I would say is that it's a private deal that we're able to obtain, and I think that it's important as one of the things that we were able to accomplish because it demonstrates that because for someone to enter into an investment like this clearly would have to demonstrate in terms of when you think of solid projections performance there is potential for growth in the companies. There is value to be harnessed, and I think that's actually a very good signal when you think about positive signals for the company that we can communicate to the market that we were able to raise that financing to move forward.
Okay.
Mhm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about GetPaid? So we are not fully clear as to, so
Right.
you mentioned a part of its business in terms of SMS and maybe e-commerce, but how profitable is GetPaid? How much a part of the strategy is it for iCreate, and what can we expect from GetPaid in the future?
Okay. So with GetPaid, I mentioned two main areas, and the SMS communication or digital communication, because there are different options for that, is an area of the business that does not have significant margin. You're leveraging someone else's infrastructure. However, it's a critical service. So, I mentioned that local companies can send messages. However, there are international companies that want to reach to not only the Jamaican market, but the Caribbean market as well. And so they're able to consolidate from large companies, Google, Meta, etc., to tap in. And so GetPaid is a company that serves as a client to these broker companies for digital communication. And there was website development services that it offers, as well as e-commerce. And those services have a higher margin that will contribute to greater profitability. As we're growing the company, because you would have seen the Q3 results just in terms of where the margins stand, as we focus on a greater composition of that revenue from e-commerce, and that would be through new partnerships. And by the way, the e-commerce can be B2B as well as B2C, so there's significant opportunity for it. We can extend regionally, though that's not immediate. But as we look at that part of the business, that division of the business more, where we'll have greater margins, then that profitability from GetPaid should grow significantly. We would have invested, or the company would have invested just before acquisition in software. We're just leveraging that now, no significant capital investment immediately for the platform, so it's able to run. And so we can look at expecting some strong profitability from that company in the coming year as well.
Okay. So as it relates to the series of events that would have led to iCreate being suspended earlier this year, there would have been essentially a governance issue that would have led to that event. How have you taken steps to ensure that those challenges won't happen again in the future?
Okay, so the good thing is, and again, what I said before is that let us do the work and then we can speak. I think you would see some signs that we've already begun to address that when it comes to the basics of compliance in terms of submitting things and meeting deadlines. So, at a minimum, and just to start out, the unaudited financial statements for the quarter ending September 30 was submitted on time. So what we did and we had this 11-point plan in terms of going in, naturally at the core of that would have been governance. And we went straight to it in terms of the external factors, the internal factors in terms of capabilities and a number of things, and able to do that. So, from a leadership perspective, it is or culture, it's now a mantra of ours. So it's not just excellence, diligence, but it is aiming for best practices in governance. So it's not just meeting deadlines, it's beating deadlines, and it's doing things with excellence. So we're taking steps towards that. But fortunately, we can say that we have begun that process and we definitely will continue to do so. You would have heard me mention that we have the board mentor in place. That was one of the things for governance. So just working through, our checklists of governance things that we have to address, we focused on that. You can look out to hear more about the composition of the board, how it is that we're strengthening that with committees. So we're beginning at the core of who we are is where we're beginning actually in terms of a culture for that. And then it's at the highest level of leadership with the board, as well as with the executive leadership and that core leadership of the chairman, myself, and the group CFO, and then filtering that now down to the companies, the leadership level of each of the companies, into the culture. So it's something that we're really working on because it is a priority for us, and we'll speak a little bit more about that at our AGM that's coming up on Friday.
Okay, so based on just what we've seen from iCreate over the past couple of years, certainly you can imagine that investors, even existing shareholders of iCreate may not be sure how to feel about the company, right? You mentioned that this is your first interview. What would you say to investors who are simply just unclear as to how to feel about the company? Because a lot of the things that you've tried to do now behind the scenes may not be visible in terms of them seeing that there is in fact change. So what would you say to those investors who are just simply unclear as to how to feel about the company?
Okay, so there's I can't ask someone to feel a particular way. What we can do is feed to them what is going to inform that feeling. What's the level of confidence that people have in iCreate right now? What is the trust that people may have for the company? These are things that we certainly have to work on. But in terms of giving them clarity, this is the start to communication. As I said, we really wanted to just get down to work. This is the start to the communication to our shareholders and to the investing public. So interviews will continue. As we roll things out, we will continue to communicate. We have our annual general meeting coming up this Friday, and it's at 10 a.m. at the Jamaica Pegasus. So there'll be more information that's going to be shared at that annual general meeting, and then we'll continue to have conversations. And each time we have updates and news to share, we will share that. Where you have questions, you have your own program and platform, Jermaine. So when you're ready, we'll come back and speak some more. Just any question that we're not able to answer right now, where you think that people really need clarity. But I've spoken about governance. I've spoken a little bit about growth strategies. So I'm not sure if there's anything specifically that you may want me to comment on at this point that you think will help with clarity, or if you can just guide me in terms of where you think people need a little more clarity in terms of what's happening with iCreate.
Okay, well, we're actually going straight to the comments now to get some of those questions.
Okay.
So Shellyanne, Shellyanne is asking, who is Arlene? What's your background and what qualifies you to be the new CEO? And how will you restore shareholders' trust?
Okay, so Shelley, and thank you for that question. Yes, we did no introduction of who I am. So within iCreate, I had previously been on the board serving as chair, initially as acting in that capacity, and then was chair. Prior to that, so my background is heavily public sector before going into private sector. So I would have worked on strategy development and largely things at a national level, export strategies, investment strategies, and policy. However, most recently in private sector, I've done business coaching and consulting, focused on helping small to medium sized and even large companies grow. So I do consulting and coaching, or I had been doing consulting and coaching with enterprises prior to this, and had some experience running my own business, which I put to hibernate coming out of COVID. So in terms of my background, in term like private sector experience, strategy experience, or just company experience, there is some that I would have had. In terms of restoring trust of our shareholders, what I would say it is that it is my intention personally, and you can understand that, to step into this capacity in light of where things are is something that some would probably say is fairly brave. And it therefore means that I'm committed and that I am confident and that I trust the team that we have, beginning with the board who all remained. So we had no board resignations at the time. We all followed the process through and worked through. So um, I have the trust of the board, have the trust of the management team of the companies. And so together we are committed to the goals that someone else just mentioned and we can comment on. But we're very committed to at restoring trust, and that is by delivering the results and delivering value to shareholders because you deserve that. You've invested in the company and you invested in the company in order for a return, and we owe that to you. So I would say, essentially, the biggest thing is I'm dedicated to making it happen, and you can trust that I'm working to build the team that will deliver that trust and that will deliver results for you.
All right. Jamaican investor is asking the vendor note for US 1,270,000 that was to be paid on deadline for September 30th this year. Was it for executed or still pending?
Right. So I think we'd covered on that, where you asked where that was, and I said that there is the private equity that we looked at for it. So that was private equity. We had you spoke about that where last year we spoke about doing an APO for raising capital for closing that vendor note. However, we've gone a different route. We've gone the private route to be able to do that.
So you were able to meet that deadline for payment of the vendor note that's being referred to here?
We are good.
Okay. All right. Sean is asking, can you tell us some of those deadlines and goals that you have set for the company? I know you mentioned governance being one of
Hmm.
them. I know you mentioned board composition,
Right.
but what can shareholders
Right.
expect
So
within
we
tangible goals?
Right. We summarized a couple of, well, not a couple, we summarized 6 key milestones that we wanted to attain in 2023 in the annual report. And it was an annual report for 2022, but we felt that with so much time that had passed, we really needed people to get a sense of what it is that we're doing. So we have one goal around corporate governance. I've hinted at that where we're aiming to best in class and not simply just meeting compliance. We are focused on strengthening the brands and the reputation. So the work on the brands is about not just awareness of the name iCreate, but an understanding. One question that we had is, what is iCreate? And it's a question that I even had once I took this role on, where people said, well, I'm familiar with the company, but what does it do? So in terms of that strengthening the brand, it is not simply a brand awareness that people know the name, but that people truly understand what the company is and have an experience of delivering value and working on the brand from that core element of it. In order to do that, we're going to have to expand the internal capabilities of the team. So it's looking at our systems, but also the team are some of the things that we're going to be looking at. And then we have some aggressive growth plans for the company for 2023 and going into. So what we're doing, and 2023 is almost over, we're doing the groundwork that will help us with our growth plans for 2024. So, and that would be measurable through revenue, profit, capitalization are some of the things that we're working on there. We would have already closed the acquisition of Visual Vibe as one of the milestones for 2023. And broadly, we're looking at the financial soundness of the company. And when we talk about financial soundness is so in terms of some key points related to that is for the group and for each of the operations is profitability from normal operations. That's something that we have to attain. We really have to attain as well positive cash flow from operations, and that would be across the groups that we're fulfilling obligations. And then year on year, what we want to look at is share value, share price, as well as market capitalization. So these are goals that we have foundational parts of it for in 2023. And then you'll hear more as we speak about our solid plans for 2024.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you intend to sell any additional shares in Visual Vibes?
So that is a consideration. So when you think about growth, and if you think about that industry where you have other persons, and Visual Vibe is purely digital. However, you have the traditional billboard companies who are entering that space. When you think of the large reach as well as that out of home advertising is growing, any significant growth for Visual Vibe is not going to come from simply reinvesting profit in the business. So if we're to double, for example, or outdoor representation, or if we're to take out of home from not just outdoor to also in home in terms of commercial places, then clearly we'll have to raise capital for that. And so that is something that is we're open to doing in 2024. And I hope that answers your question, Jermaine.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Jamaican investor is asking who holds the 25.5 million preference shares of iCreate.
So I know that that is. Could you bring that question to our AGM? But I'll look into that in terms of just some specifics on that. We can look at that. But we have published. I mean, it's a publicly traded company, so I know that information is listed as well.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if it's like a total in terms of the breakdown, or if there's something specific that person wanted to know. So
Jamaican investor, can you give us some context?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
There was also
yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to get in a couple of
Sure.
questions.
Yeah, so this is on the chalet development. You can
Yes.
expect to see reporting on that not in next year. So when you think of the duration, so it's it's real estate development, it takes time. So with the phase of the development where you'll have most of the progress in 2024, that's when you'll see any kind of reporting from iCreate on or investment relationship with the chalet development. So you will not see information on that in terms of financial figures from that immediately.
Okay. So I just have two more questions for you. One,
right.
When can investors expect to see the company profitable overall from all of its operations? That's the first one.
That's an interesting one. So we're starting with each of the companies being profitable from operations next year. It's an ambitious target. We already have that in place for the entities GetPaid as well as Visual Vibe. We have to restore growth for iCreate the Institute in terms of with the program delivery. So we'll have that, and we're focused on partnerships for new programs to offer to the market, reintroducing the training programs, as I mentioned, more of those in-person ones, as well as continuing the partnerships that we had with key stakeholders, partners in the Jamaican landscape, corporate as well as non-corporate persons. So we're looking towards profitability from all operations next year.
Okay. And the final question that I'll ask you for now is, so you mentioned potentially raising capital for next year. Any thoughts as to what that would look like? Is that in Q1, Q2 of next year? And what do you see yourself targeting the use of those funds for?
So Q1 would be very early, Jermaine. We're beginning to put the planning in place for it. So what I mentioned in terms of the funding for that, the purpose of that is really the expansion of Visual Vibe. I did hint to that in terms of when you look at the representation as well as the significant potential of the sector across Jamaica as well as regionally. The number of screens that you have and what's happening, then we can significantly grow the company with additional screens in new locations. We're in 5 parishes, so we can expand that significantly, as well as shift from, or not even shift, but expand from only outdoor to actually indoor out of home advertising. So for the purpose of that investment in the company would be significant expansion.
Okay. So do you have any final comments to shareholders and our audience?
Yes. So I realize that there are a lot of questions. So now I understand, Jermaine, what it is that you are referring to. So what I would say is, and hopefully these questions are saved and we can access them at some point. What I would say is that I hear you that there is a need to share more information, to speak solidly, plainly about what's happening in the company. So we will actually begin that. I mentioned that we have our AGM on Friday. You'll hear more plans from us. And going from that, as we close out 2023 and as we go into 2024, we'll definitely be speaking a lot more. Via persons like you with your program, Jermaine, as others, Kalila, to share information as things happen. Posting things, we've been posting things on the website, but we really need to speak. And so what I would say to persons is expect, hopefully they'll invite iCreate again to hear more about what it is that we're doing. But not just it's not for us, it really is for you. So keep the questions going into them, and we'll make ourselves available to share information with you so that you understand what's happening in the company and how it will impact you and the share performance of the company.
All right. Thank you so much, Arlene, for the
Thank
time.
you.
All the
Thank
best.
you.